This is Byron Black, a 69-year-old man in a wheelchair with severe disabilities, facing his final moments. But instead of a quick, painless execution, witnesses saw something that will haunt them forever. From his heartbreaking childhood, to the night of a brutal triple murder, to the shocking final meal, last words, and the disturbing scene inside the execution chamber, this is a story you won't believe actually happened in 2025. But before we talk about the trial and the controversies, we need to understand where Byron Black came from, because his childhood shaped everything that followed. Byron Black's story didn't start in a prison cell. It started in a small Tennessee town in the mid-1950s. He was born into a working-class African-American family that, like many at the time, faced both financial struggles and social discrimination. From the start, Byron's life was filled with challenges most of us can't imagine. His mother drank during pregnancy, not knowing the long-term effects it could have. Years later, doctors would say he showed signs of prenatal alcohol exposure. When Byron was still a toddler, lead paint in his home caused toxic exposure. Back then, lead-based paint was common, but for a young child, it could damage the brain permanently. School was never easy for him. Teachers noticed he had trouble keeping up with reading and math, but resources for special education were limited. Instead of getting extra help, Byron often got labeled as lazy or difficult. Classmates teased him, and he became quieter, avoiding attention whenever possible. Sports were one of the few things that made him feel included. Byron joined his school's football team, but even there, trouble followed. He suffered at least 2 head injuries from hard tackles, back in the days before anyone talked about concussions or brain trauma. Those hits likely made his cognitive problems worse. At home, Byron's family was close-knit. They held big reunions, and relatives often stepped in to help each other with childcare or money. He grew up hearing stories about his ancestors, including relatives enslaved during the time of President James Polk. Byron loved these family gatherings, and they gave him a sense of belonging he didn't always feel elsewhere. Despite these war memories, Byron struggled to live independently as an adult. He bounced between jobs, usually low-paying and short-term. He needed help with basic tasks like managing bills or cooking. Friends described him as gentle and polite, but also easily confused and quick to trust people who didn't always have good intentions. Now that we know how Byron grew up, it's time to look at the night that changed everything, the 1988 murders that put him on death row. On a quiet evening in 1988, tragedy struck a small Nashville neighborhood. Angela Clay, Byron Black's 29-year-old girlfriend, lived in a modest home with her 2 young daughters, LaToya, age 9, and Lakeisha, just 6. Neighbors remembered Angela as friendly but private, often keeping to herself except for brief chats in the yard. According to police records, that night began like any other. The girls were getting ready for bed, and Angela had been speaking on the phone to a friend. But before the night was over, all 3 were dead. The killing shocked the entire community, not just because of the brutality, but because the suspect was someone so close to them. The crime scene told a disturbing story. Angela was found in the living room, and the 2 girls were in their shared bedroom. There were signs of a struggle, and investigators believed the murders happened quickly, leaving little chance for the victims to escape or call for help. Byron was soon identified as a person of interest. He had been in an on and off relationship with Angela, and while there were no major public fights between them, friends said the relationship had its tensions. Police questioned him about his whereabouts that night, and inconsistencies in his story caught their attention. Evidence collection in 1988 was not as advanced as today. Still, investigators claimed they found enough physical clues and witness statements to link Byron to the murders. A neighbor reported hearing shouting earlier that evening, followed by a loud bang. Another said they saw a car matching Byron's leaving the area around the estimated time of death. With the murders making headlines, investigators moved quickly, and the police investigation into Byron Black would shape the rest of his life. Detectives interviewed anyone who had seen or spoken to Byron in the days before and after the murders. They traced his movements on the night of the crime, piecing together a timeline based on phone calls, receipts, and eyewitness accounts. Several people recalled seeing him near Angela's house that evening, though the exact times varied. In 1988, DNA testing was still in its early stages, so prosecutors relied heavily on circumstantial evidence. They collected fibers from Byron's clothing, hair samples from the crime scene, and even analyzed footprints found outside the home. Police also focused on his car, checking for traces of blood, fingerprints, or any items that might connect him to the killings. One of the most talked about pieces of evidence was a set of tire tracks found near Angela's driveway. Investigators said they matched the pattern from Byron's vehicle. His defense later argued that the tracks could have been from any similar car, but at the time, the police presented it as a strong link. Interrogations were intense. Officers claimed Byron gave conflicting statements about where he was that night. They said he first denied going to Angela's house, then later admitted he might have stopped by but couldn't remember clearly. Given his documented cognitive issues, this confusion may not have been unusual, but to the detectives, it looked suspicious. The police also searched Byron's small apartment, seizing clothing, photographs, and personal items. Although no clear murder weapon was found, prosecutors said the overall picture was enough to charge him with 3 counts of homicide. The investigation was only the beginning. What happened in the courtroom would seal Byron Black's fate for the next 35 years. Byron Black's trial began in 1989 in a Nashville courtroom packed with reporters, family members, and curious locals. The prosecution framed the case as straightforward. A man with a troubled relationship kills his girlfriend and her 2 children in a fit of rage. They presented their physical evidence, eyewitness accounts, and forensic reports in a tight narrative designed to leave no room for doubt. The fiber samples, tire track analysis, and witness testimony about Byron's presence near the crime scene were central to their argument. Prosecutors emphasized inconsistencies in his statements to police, suggesting he was trying to cover his tracks. They also hinted at personal disagreements between him and Angela, though the details were vague. The defense took a different approach. They didn't just argue about evidence, they focused on Byron's mental state. His attorney at the time claimed Byron didn't fully understand the legal process and was incapable of participating in his defense. They brought in psychologists who testified about his cognitive limitations and brain injuries. However, in 1989, the legal definition of intellectual disability was far narrower than it is today. Jury selection was another hurdle. Many potential jurors admitted they had already formed strong opinions from media coverage. Still, the court seated a panel that the judge considered impartial. Over the course of the trial, jurors listened to emotional testimony from Angela's family and saw photographs from the crime scene, images that left many visibly shaken. After the trial, Byron's life changed forever. Death row became his world, and surviving there was its own story. Death row inmates lived in small single cells, usually about the size of a parking space. For Byron, the days followed a predictable rhythm. Wake up early, eat simple meals delivered to the cell, and spend most hours in isolation. Inmates were allowed out for exercise a few times a week, usually in a fenced yard where the sky was visible but freedom was still far away. Byron's health problems meant he didn't participate much in physical activities. Instead, he would often sit quietly, sometimes talking to other prisoners through the walls or during rare group moments. Books and letters became important. Byron loved reading the Bible and occasionally received novels from supporters or family. Letters were a lifeline, a way to feel connected to a world that kept moving without him. Over the years, pen pals and advocacy groups reached out, exchanging stories, photos, and encouragement. Prison meals were basic: beans, rice, pasta, bread, and occasionally small portions of meat. Byron often saved parts of his meals to share with other inmates who had less, a gesture that earned him quiet respect from those around him. But while prison life was slow, Byron's health was failing fast, and his medical condition became one of the most controversial parts of his case. Over his decades on death row, Byron Black's body began to break down. Years earlier, he had already been diagnosed with severe intellectual disabilities, the result of brain damage from childhood lead poisoning, prenatal alcohol exposure, and head injuries. But in prison, his physical health collapsed alongside his mental state. He developed kidney failure, which made him weak and tired most days. Heart problems led to the installation of a defibrillator, a small device inside his chest meant to prevent sudden cardiac arrest. This device would later become a major point of concern for his legal team as his execution date approached. Prostate cancer struck in his later years, and while surgery was attempted, complications nearly killed him. His lawyer said he never fully recovered from that operation. Over time, he lost the ability to walk without assistance. At first, prison staff would wheel him to legal visits in an office chair because a proper wheelchair wasn't available. Eventually, they provided one, but his mobility never returned. Byron also suffered from dementia, which caused memory loss and confusion. Sometimes he forgot where he was or why certain things were happening. Lawyers and advocates describe moments where he would mix up timelines or fail to recognize people he had known for years. Through it all, one person stood by him for 25 years, his lawyer, who became more than just legal counsel. Kelly Henry first met Byron Black in 2000, when she was pregnant with her second child. At the time, she was a federal public defender assigned to death penalty cases, but she didn't yet realize just how deeply she would become connected to Byron's life. Their first meeting was quiet. Byron didn't talk much about the crime or the legal battle. He preferred to speak about his family. He told Kelly stories about legendary family reunions where relatives from all 50 states came together. He remembered every birthday of the people he cared about, writing them in a makeshift calendar. Over the years, Kelly visited Byron hundreds of times. She saw his health decline and his mind slip further into confusion. But what struck her most was his consistent kindness. He never spoke harshly about anyone, not even prison staff. He never once demanded she work faster or promised him a certain outcome. Instead, he would always say, "God bless you. I appreciate you." Kelly fought for him in courtrooms across the state. She filed appeals arguing his intellectual disability should exempt him from execution, citing new medical definitions in his worsening condition. She presented medical reports, expert testimonies, and evidence of procedural errors in his trial. In the last week of Byron Black's life, the atmosphere inside Riverbend Maximum Security Prison shifted. Death row was used to the occasional execution, but when it's someone the staff has known for decades, the mood changes. Guards spoke more softly around his cell, and fellow inmates called out words of support when they could. Byron spent much of his final night awake. Guards reported seeing him sitting quietly, holding a Bible, and occasionally writing on a small notepad. Whatever he wrote was folded and kept with his personal belongings. As dawn broke on execution day, he was moved to a holding area near the death chamber. This was standard procedure, giving staff time to prepare and allowing him to have last conversations with his lawyer and spiritual advisor. The air was heavy with silence, broken only by the occasional metallic sound of doors opening and closing. By the time the clock neared 10 a.m., everything was set. The witnesses had taken their seats, the gurney waited, and Byron Black was about to face his final moments. But before the lethal injection began, Byron was given one last act of choice, his final meal, and any words he wanted to leave behind. For his final meal, Byron Black didn't request anything extravagant. Unlike the cinematic images of steak dinners or lavish desserts, his choice was simple: fried chicken, mashed potatoes with gravy, green beans, and cornbread. For dessert, he asked for peach cobbler, a nod to the southern comfort food he grew up with. To drink, he chose sweet tea, a favorite from his childhood. The meal was served the evening before the execution. Byron ate slowly, talking quietly with the guard assigned to watch him. He thanked the kitchen staff for preparing it, even though they weren't in the room. He didn't finish everything, leaving some portions untouched. When asked if he wanted to make an official final statement, Byron hesitated. He told his lawyer he wasn't sure what to say. He was shy about speaking in front of a crowd, especially in a moment like this. Eventually, he decided he would let his lawyer read something on his behalf. In that message, Byron thanked his friends and family for their love over the years. He said their relationships had been very special and that he would never forget them. To his legal team, he said, "God gave you a gift. You have power, and I can feel it." And that brings us to the most disturbing part: the execution procedure itself, and why so many believe it was botched. At 10:15 a.m., Byron was wheeled into the chamber. He was lifted from his chair onto the gurney and secured with wide black straps across his chest, stomach, and legs. 2 IV lines were needed to administer the lethal injection. So, do you think Byron Black's execution was justice served or cruelty disguised? Drop your answer in the comments and hit that subscribe button right now. Turn on the bell so you don't miss out on the next one, and join the crew that refuses to look away from the truth.